All right, so welcome. Today we've got a special guest from the Writing Center. Ben Reed is with us to help me talk to you about technical writing. Just a reminder, though, about a few things that your first draft is due this Friday by midnight. You hand it in as a PDF in Canvas. Remember that it is graded based on completion. It doesn't have to be great. It should be good, though. You should try to be striving for as good of a document as you can. But you are going to have many opportunities throughout the semester to improve it based on our feedback for that. The other thing to remember is that if you are going to go for that bonus, make sure that your test cases are also in by Friday. We grab those and we use them to grade everybody else. And that's why we make it bonus. We crowdsource it out to everybody beyond our own test case, of course. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, I'd like to thank Ben for coming here today, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to him, but we'll, of course, be going back and forth here. All right, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. And also just wanted to double check in chat, is volume and everything going good? We get some thumbs up and everything. Okay, perfect. So yes, as Dr. Burke introduced, I am Ben Reed. I'm one of the graduate assistant directors at the UNL Writing Center. We're not too far away, just over in Andrews Hall, room 102 is kind of our main area. And so it's sounding like you're gonna all be working on some drafts through the semester. So we're gonna talk about some skills here that the Writing Center can help you out in the drafting process. But of course, I want to extend the invitation that you can also bring those drafts into us. It is a free service. We do offer one-on-one consultations. So if you just need another writer that doesn't have the red pen that will put a letter or a percentage next to your writing, that is something we are here for to help you with, is to give reader reactions, reader questions, and we can also help on some of the more technical aspects if there's grammar or citation or things like that. Those are something that we also offer and help out with. Just one thing that I want to preface, though, a lot of what we do is not just going to be me talking at you. That would be very boring. But there is going to be some involvement in work that I ask of you today in a collaborative setting. So this could involve discussing things with a partner. This will also be like just writing down on something. So if you just have a word processor or something handy here in the near future, that would be great. For those folks on the coming in remotely, what we would just ask that anytime I'm telling people to partner up or share observations, you can just use the chat feature, and that will be perhaps a very big group, but I still think a collaborative and useful one nevertheless. I guess then just a quick fact or two about me. I've been involved in the Writing Center for about the last 4 years, but this is the first time, the first year rather, that I've been a bit more of an administrative capacity alongside the lead director, Rachel Azima, and my co-director, Erica Kush. But that being said, we also have a lot of people in the Writing Center that are right from amongst you all. So we have a very large undergraduate staff alongside some graduate consultants. We all have very similar training and are here to help. Okay, so why even bother talking about technical writing and writing skills? Data is always useful here. So what we have is basically collected data from 200 different employers. This is everything from Red Cross to Apple. Here's a bunch of different competencies in the workforce that people are interested in. And then you'll also notice that there is what they actually feel people were rated as competent in those instances. Obviously, we're going to be focusing on the oral and written communication side here. So let's get a little bit of group interaction first. How many people, I'll go through a couple of percentiles here, show of hands, how many people think that about 50% of employers said that written communication was good? 60? 70? 80? 90? So we've got ourselves 95.9% of employers were saying that they put value in oral and written communication, that is something they want in the people that they hire. So now we'll start at the top and we'll go lower. How many, what percentage do we think then these employers said that people kind of coming out of college and hiring had what they would consider proficient levels of oral and written communication here? 90%. 80. 70. 60. 50. Less than 50. Yes, according to the data, about 41.5% of the incoming, hires that were done considered that there was proficient levels of oral and written communication skills. Now, this might be you saying like, okay, I lost the lottery. I've never been good at writing. I'm doomed. The teachers always make my papers bleed. Who even knows what Shakespeare is talking about? That's for somebody else. I'm over here in the data and the code and the work in computers because that makes sense to me. And the assurance that I want to offer you is that no matter what background you're coming from or what you're working on in your your education or more of your professional goals, writing is a skill that can be developed and grow, and we want to offer you some tools that help out with that. But again, I think this is just an important factor that no matter where you're thinking for your dream job or work that you might do once you're done with your education, or you might be considering taking steps into higher education too, that's often going to require some sort of cover letter to kind of show why you are an ideal candidate. So
I would add that our industry advisory panel, this is exactly the same kind of sentiment we get from our industry partners and industry advisory panels, as well as alumni, that it is an overlooked skill. And we're not talking about, writing a five-page essay on Shakespeare or whatever. We're talking about even simple things like drafting a coherent email. That you can express your ideas in a concise and understandable manner to a coworker, to a boss, to somebody, right? You might go to the writing center and get excellent feedback on that initial cover letter and that resume, and that might get you in the door. But when you've actually got the job, this kind of oral and written communication skills are absolutely essential to keeping the job and growing within that industry and growing within that position. And again, it's everything from emails all the way up to writing a design document like you're doing right now. And in fact, coding itself, as we'll see here through a couple of exercises, is technical writing. It's just that you're writing for a different audience. You're writing for both another technical person and you're writing for an inanimate computer, right? So.
One of which is probably going to be, well, I don't know, maybe different levels of forgiveness. It's kind of hard to see which one is which.
Exactly.
All right. So, agendas. What we're going to be working on here for the rest of this class session is a few different activities that are connected to things that we do in the Writing Center to help you go through drafting and revision. So, we're going to be spending about 10-ish minutes here on what's called free writing. What this basically means is sometimes you come into the Writing Center and maybe you've got the blinking cursor of doom on a white screen. Maybe you've come up with a new idea or you've received feedback from either an instructor or your colleagues. But what you just need to do is get like some words down on paper which can be discussed. That's where free writing can be a very helpful tool. And we're going to use an example here with with an article that was submitted to you to read for today. And then after that, we will shift into a process which is called reverse outlining, and how this can go from everything from a cover letter to your actual code. And then lastly, we're going to do what's called genre and audience analysis on a piece of writing, which is going to be the design document that you're working on. So all of these are what we call transferable skills. Sure, we're going to be using them in a particular context today, but it doesn't just get used on the example we show you. This can work on a lot of different projects and pieces of writing that you do. We just want you to get some familiarity with this tool before you put it into your theoretical toolkit. All right. So we are going to start off here with the free writing activity. So this is where those word processing programs I asked you to have up and ready will be helpful. This isn't going to be anything that you turn in. This is actually one of the beauties of free writing. This is mostly writing for you to generate ideas, and it's not going to technically be seen or evaluated necessarily by anybody. So what we would like to do as a prompt for this, in that shared article, Writing Good Code is like writing a novel, the author argues that the process of writing code and the process of writing a novel are similar. And then they focus in particular on the drafting process. So this might cause your stomachs to churn a little bit, but maybe think about essays or other papers that you've written. What were your steps taking, like from the beginning to getting to the final draft, whether that has been weeks or the hour before? No judgment, I know that happens. But what is your process, even if you have like an hour to write something? And then what I'd like you to also consider is how these steps are similar to your coding. So part one, how you put writing together from beginning steps to final draft, and how does that look similar to coding? We're going to give you about 4 minutes to do this. Just type what thoughts ever come to mind. If there is a period where you don't know what to think about for the topic, this will seem silly, but keep on writing still. You can say blah, 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 or I need some Starbucks right now, or something like that, Dunkin' Donuts. And then when a new thought comes to your mind, then transition over to that. So we're going to give this about 4 minutes here. Everyone kind of see the questions to respond to. Okay, I'm going to be quiet now for a moment. Type away. And again, just keep writing, even if it just ends up being, I wish the weather was warmer right now.
Maybe at 15? Okay. And if you get somebody to answer, you might want to repeat it or summarize it because they won't be able to hear. We've got 17 on ours. It matters.
Let's take about a minute more or so here so you can be finishing off a thought or jotting down what your weekend plans are. Mine's going to be continuing moving. Had to lug a couch up the stairs multiple times yesterday. It was not fun. Okay. If this was grade school, I'd say pencils down or something along those lines, but these are all laptops anyway, so maybe that's a dated statement. Before we share a couple of observations and thoughts here, some of you might not feel comfortable doing that for a room full of people, which is completely fine, which is why we then offer the opportunity to maybe share it with one of the people next to you. It seems like we kind of have pre-made clusters, 2, 3, 4 people. Not asking you to get up and completely move across the room, but find kind of the closest person or persons next to you and share a few of your thoughts. And hopefully we'll get some that we can then go more full class on that. And for those coming in remotely, you can just post some of the things that you wrote about or your thoughts in the chat. So let's take a minute or two just to share just your ideas with people. All right, conversations seem to be dwindling here a little bit, and that's perfectly fine. It was better than hearing crickets, which you never know. So very lively for 11 in the morning. That makes me happy. Would a few folks be willing to share one or two of your observations, either that you found interesting within the group or something that you wrote down? And then it will seem like an echo chamber. I'll just repeat it here in the microphone for the folks on remote. So yeah, how did you see differences, parallels? Yes, please.
I saw parallels with if you make an idea into an object, every idea has specific parts that you have to use, such as the variables and things like that. And then once you have those parts, you can use those and merge them into actual writing from the actual content by the same way you would make functions with the variables and things like that. And then once you have all those different pieces of the writing, paragraphs or things like that, you can wrap it all up and say what you fully did at the in each of the sections, kind of putting together the final code and actually calling out those functions in the main.
Yeah, so that's great. So what we have in those comments here is we were sort of touching on sort of the steps of the writing process, as we like to call it. So you might have this brainstorming or pre-writing session where you're trying to lock in on an idea or a concept that you might want to explore. Then you start moving into the drafting stage, which is putting those into some more concrete types of content. Maybe it's sharing research results and everything that you've done. And then we move into sort of the revision stages where once there's content that's been developed, we can start making adjustments to it. Although there was also that kind of interesting point brought up here that we can also reflect a bit on writing that we do as well. So thinking about, is there anything further we would want to adjust based on feedback or, desires of a client or audience? Although sometimes it's also worthy for us just to think like what that entire process meant to us individually. Like, oh, was there something I could have done better in the coding? Is there new tools that I discovered or I might want to use? So that was really interesting, sort of that reflection sort of aspect too. Yes?
I was going to say that when you're doing some sort of technical writing, research, you have to explain your methodology or how you got some results, which is kind of the same thing between coding and comments and how this whole functions work methods.
Okay, so we have an observation here, like the idea of being able to transfer or potentially explain or give rationale for a particular choice or methods. And yeah, that's excellent, especially when editing and writing goes too. Like comments are often used on the writing as well to establish dialogue, whether it's between editors or co-authors on that. So there can even be this entire underlying form of communication that goes on in the writing too. These are great. Others, yes.
Me, I would say like how right can be split up into like the main parts of the arguments, how we can organize them or these main parts, how we can separate different functions into separate classes that you may want to use later on, so it doesn't get too repetitive and stuff.
Yeah, so the idea of organizing and also making the decision that sometimes parts could either move or be saved for something completely different. That's something that goes really well with drafting, especially when writing is concerned. And I bet you could do it with coding as well, like save different versions of the project in the file, making sure that they're dated, kind of time-stamped. Because even if it doesn't work out, like for that particular project at the time, if you've done the work, the research, and the coding, it could, then be transferred to something else. So it's having just a single document on like a thumb drive or something like that, it's a start. I mean, you're at least working on what it is that you want to do. But there is definite benefits to drafting and having multiple copies of drafts. Charlotte, one of the folks who has given this presentation in the past, has often showcased that they had something like 100 different drafts as they were working on application letters, which even me, I go like, whoa, that is a lot. But yes, I think that that's great that there's these ideas of, in terms of organization, for example, making sure that you know where things are moving, and also not necessarily just completely destroying it, but, putting it off to the side can be really useful.
And I distilled what everybody just said into these lists up here, right? Making lists, making sub-lists, organizing. Something I heard in the discussion that you didn't mention, though, that should have been mentioned is diagramming, drawing things, right? Lists are bulleted lists, but diagrams show you a picture, and drawing arrows between things show you the relationships between those. The parallels from free write to how we do code, another key word that I didn't hear that I try to get everybody to try it before you even start opening your IDE at all. What do? Whiteboard, exactly what I was just doing, right? You whiteboard everything. You write your ideas out, right? And then if something is bad, you cross it out. You erase it, right? Then you take what you've whiteboarded, the ideas that you've spit back and forth between your partner or just with yourself, and then you can get rid of the things that don't matter, right? And then keep the things that do matter. You can go a step further on this with reorganization of stuff, right? You'll see whiteboards all the time, and people don't actually write on the whiteboards. Instead, they write on Post-its. Why do they write on Post-its? Because you can take the Post-it off and move it around, right? And if you've got, when you're brainstorming, when you're whiteboarding for code, you're doing all of these things, but then ultimately you'll want to organize them and maybe shift things around. And it's easy to shift things around if it's easily movable, right? Or it's even just even just the act of taking this one class here and moving it over here just to see what it looks like, right? Oh no, that's wrong, right? Then you immediately put it back. It's just being able to have that kind of tool at your disposal, whiteboarding, Post-it notes. It doesn't even have to be any technology whatsoever. When we say free write in the context of code and design, we say whiteboarding.
Yes, so thank you for those parallels, and I think that is, a good point to also bring up, that certainly the ability to store and like quickly write things out, I mean, I think about my own handwriting. It's not always the most legible. But yeah, there is something to be said about the physical capability of making connections, like what the hand is doing then makes a closer connection with the brain. And these ideas of being able to see your ideas on like post-it notes, for example, moving around. So it might seem sometimes archaic, but there is a guiding and important principle to going in and using like the whiteboarding and that sort of free writing stage. Any kind of just other initial questions on just like how free writing works or how it could be applied?
So one last thing that I would note is that it is a cure for writer's block.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're just you have this daunting task in front of you, and you just can't even get out that first line of code or that first idea. Don't worry about it. Just stream of consciousness, start writing. Right? As you pointed out, write about your weekend then. Something completely irrelevant. That often is the key to just breaking through that writer's block, through that wall. And once you've written down one sentence, right, then it's so much easier to start writing other things. Once you've written down one list or one diagram or something like that, then it all starts flowing. Right? It's the hardest thing is usually just that first step.
Yeah, and this can also be the case too that sometimes if you are a very chronological type of writer, where it's like, okay, I have to have my introduction first, or I see that I need sections 1, 2, 3, and 4. If I don't see something in section 1, I can't get into 2, 3, and 4. Like, that is, again, a great writer's block breaking opportunity where you realize, okay, I'm putting something in here. Revisions in time will allow for this to grow and develop in different ways. But yes, the blinking cursor of doom is always a huge obstacle to surmount, but that's also where the writing center or your colleagues can be also really helpful. Just like being quiet for a moment and just letting this non-judge, non-evaluative, sometimes word vomit, just go out onto the paper. But that is an encouraging moment because then you move from a state of not having done any progress to seeing your ideas come to light. Okay, so the next strategy that we're going to be working on here is what's known as reverse outlinings. So just quick show of hands or nods or things like that. Who has done like an outline before starting? This could be like those webs, or it could be like, points and bullet points. Okay, seeing some hands. So this is usually happening at the end or the beginning. Beginning. And that's completely fine and understandable. Outlining is one of the kind of most taught and exposed to pre-writing or brainstorming strategies. However, there is another spin or take that you can use for the outlining process, which is reverse outlining. Now, reverse outlining does require a complete draft because this is, as was sort of shared a little bit earlier on here at the front, like organization and the moving around of parts is really important when it comes to putting that final edit and polish or just revising a piece of writing or code in this case. So how reverse outlining works is you go back through the entirety of the document that you're working on and you give yourself little comments and notes and observations talking about what the function of each section of writing is accomplishing, and this is important, one single sentence. If you start seeing that there are like 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences explaining like what the paragraph is doing, chances are you've got a lot of useful ideas, but they're probably all being crammed in this very tight space that A, is probably not being explained well enough to your reader, and 2, your reader is going to be feeling like they need to catch their breath at the end of the paragraph because so much information there. So there's a couple of different uses then for the reverse outline. It's first off seeing what each paragraph is doing. Does that then connect to your general idea, whether that's getting a grant or, proving that your coding works to a client? And then secondly, it goes into oh, did I talk about this in two completely different sections? Could I bring them close together? Because otherwise, your reader is probably going to have a sense of deja vu, where it's just like, wait, didn't we talk about this like a page or two ago? Am I just like making stuff up here? But if they're like all combined together, not only does that sort of get your research closer together, but it also makes the reader not feel like they're getting lost. Also important then here in the reverse outlining is numbering your paragraphs as well, because this can then be an opportunity for you to say like, oh, paragraphs 2, 9, and 13 actually are talking about the same sort of things. Can I bring them together? Do I actually need all of those paragraphs, or did I actually find that I was repeating myself a bit too much? So let's take a look then at an example. So here we have a letter of application to a job, and we have sort of these two sections here, one in blue and one in green. So I am writing with great enthusiasm to apply for the position of Learning Commons Supervisor at Cuyahoga Community College. I am currently the Associate Director of the Writing Center at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Then the second part, I have 7+ years of experience providing tutoring and administrative support in a Learning Commons environment. As the Associate Director of the Writing Center, I am currently responsible for supervising a staff of 20 undergraduate and graduate tutors who meet individually with students, staff, and faculty across the disciplines to conference about their writing. My responsibilities include, and then it continues going on. So we've got complete drafted paragraphs, right? We're not, just in bullet points mode. We've got full sentences. We have an audience in mind here of the hiring committee. So if we were to reverse outline this in a single sentence, introducing myself and my purpose to the reader, so getting hired at this particular institution, who they are, and then the second part, we move into the qualifications for the job. So talking about the number of years, like the skills that were involved, who they were working with. And so this is a moment where we can pretty confidently say, okay, yes, these are things that a hiring committee reader would be interested in. It makes logical sense that I would put the introduction of myself on the first paragraph. If you found that the introduction of saying, oh, hi, I'm Ben Reed, didn't happen until like paragraph 4, that could probably get moved up a little bit earlier. But maybe that was just a carryover of some drafting and free writing that you had to do. Also, if you then saw like a paragraph where it's like, oh, I'm talking about, my dog that I really liked, when you're applying for, again, like something that's coding heavy. Not to say that stories of your dog couldn't be related, but if it's just talking about I like going walks around the lake with Sparky, instead of like, oh, Sparky, I designed like some code based on something that I noticed with my dog's behaviors or something like that. Again, like that's where reverse outlining comes into play. Like, do you see it connecting to your purpose, your goal, your audience, and does it need to be moved, whether that is within the piece of writing or somewhere else? Okay, so we're talking about letters and everything here, but here's the big surprise. You can do this with coding itself, and I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Burke for a moment.
Sure. So this is an exercise that we used several years ago. It's called a suffix array. You probably saw it on one of the handouts that we did before. I don't know if we did this or not. In any case, a suffix, given a word or a phrase or something like that, the suffixes are all of the end parts. So for example, for science, one suffix is science itself, and then you cut off the first letter and it's the rest of the word, ience, ence, and so forth. On the left here are all the suffixes of that word. You want to, the task here is to write a program that, given a word or a phrase or just a string basically, cuts it up and produces a collection of all of these suffixes. Then sort that collection in lexicographic order. And that's the result on the right-hand side there, okay? So, as part of the reverse outline, let's take a look at this piece of code here that basically achieves that. Right? It's not a full program because you don't have the main here or anything like that, but this is the relevant part. Right? Now, with your the same person that you talked to before, or a new person or whatever, just go back and forth here and do a reverse outline of this. Right? With a writing sample, you have paragraphs and sentences that you have to break down, but with code, you have the exact same thing. Hopefully, you can see some paragraphs here. Hopefully, you can see some sentences here. And you can use the exact same technique here and come up with a reverse outline.
Yeah,
we'll go ahead and give you, how much? 4 minutes? Just a couple minutes to discuss
yeah.
it with the person next to you?
Yeah, so again, remember the steps of the process. Try to number these sections as you see them, and then try to put like the singular sentence purpose on it. So what is it being achieved in these portions of code? Yeah, so take a few minutes to discuss on this.
The only comment on mine so far is that there was no Oxford comma in the writing sample, I assume.
Let's say you could put it into two groups.
Does anybody want to give us our first bullet point, or first number one, I guess? Yeah, go ahead. All right, so number one would apply to this one line right here? Okay. And it's you're creating a new list. Okay. What about number two then? Populating that list. So the for loop, right? Right. So creating a new list, populating a new list. You could argue that that's one paragraph, and so it's one bullet point or one numbered in an enumeration, right? With two subparts, right? Going back to what we were doing before, making lists and making sublists. Then jumping ahead here, you sort the collection, right? And then you print the collection, right? So Charlotte never put the numbers, but she put the sub numbers there. But that's 1, 2, and 3, right? Thoughts on that process? Was it easy? Was it straightforward? Was it obvious? Why? Good code, right? Good code, clean code, right? How did you know that there were three, just without even reading one of the sentences, how did you know that there were three ideas here? The white spacing, right? How did you know what the first one was? Okay, here's the suffix, and okay, well, yeah, it's adding something to the suffix array. Variable names, right? It's this suffix collection, right? Collections.sort, right? It does exactly what it says on the tin, right?
Does the color coding also help at all?
Exactly. Using modern IDEs, you probably never, and nobody in here has even seen old IDEs with black and white without the syntax highlighting, right? We no longer live in that world here, right? When we get to SQL, we will talk about that though, because one style of SQL, the modern style of SQL, is certainly different from the old style of SQL in casing. So the second example that we have here is it is a solution, right? It does work. It is 100% correct. I guarantee it. Right? Now, outline that. Does anybody want to take a stab at it?
Never closed their scanner.
Oh, okay. Never close the scanner, first of all. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, good eye there. It's not showing all the way up the top, but there is ijk all equal to 0 here. Actually, only k is equal to 0.
And if you can figure out like a specific purpose, what challenges are getting in the way, that's also worth sharing.
Yeah, nobody really wants to do this with this code, right? Why don't you want to do that with this code? It's too long? Too verbose? It's what? Yeah, there's nothing that means anything, right? What is I, J, and K? What is S? What is temp? Temp 2, right? Terrible. So everything that what made this piece of code good makes this piece of code bad, right? Bad variable names, verbose stuff, right? I think that what they do is they split everything out and then combine it all back together and then just split it out again. So superfluous work, right? It's just a huge mess. And in case you think that no, this does not represent one person. The submissions for that year, I just simply went through them and took the worst aspects of each one and then combined them all together into one big giant Frankenstein code, made sure that it worked so that it was still correct code, but it's obviously terrible code, right? Think about like you said before, repetition in your design documents, in your technical writing. If you say the same thing over and over and over again, that's what this is doing. If you have disorganized thoughts, no lists whatsoever, right? That's what that's what comes of disorganization. This code comes of disorganization.
So, I mean, this is all just like matrix code to me, like just scrolling down. And because the matrix got the fourth one, and I don't feel like I can feel like I can make those references again. Some people stared at me blankly when I was making matrix references 5 or so years ago, but now it feels more modern. But I also assume that, like, you were talking earlier about that there's clear definitions. So if we were to reverse outline this code, like, we maybe couldn't necessarily say a specific thing is being defined in this section, or maybe multiple interwoven things are being. Is that accurate?
Yeah, exactly. If you did go through the process of reverse outlining, you would find repetition, 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 right? Cruft, right? They like you said, they commented out old code. Do you do that in writing? I need to cut this sentence out, so I'll just go ahead and put a line through it and then hand it in a final draft. No, you get rid of it, right? So, writing code, writing paragraphs in a document, technical document, or a novel, or a 5-paragraph essay, it's exactly the same process.
Yes, exactly. And so this then shows up in a different portion of the process too, right? We have moved from the concept of the idea to the content. And having that extra time to think about and reflect on the writing, what it is attempting to achieve, and is it achieving that effectively? It's just like, for example, you might notice in your reverse outlining of code, perhaps you took a different string that you use for an application as like a placeholder for a title screen or something like that. Doing the reverse outlining could be like, I have made the title screen for, oops, this is actually the old application that I made like a year ago. So you're recognizing, yes, it's its purpose, but like specifically in that one sentence, you're saying it's the title screen for this specific application, and then that can help you catch some of these errors as well. You can only really do reverse outlining well if you peer closer at the writing itself. It's not just skimming it to say like, a comma is missing. It's like, okay, I need to think about what this is actually doing. And this also is something that wasn't really talked about in the initial slide about the reverse outlining, but much like you would do with a thesis of an essay, it's really good to write your purpose of your code up at the top, because that's always then a good visual reminder. It's like, I'm providing this definition. Does this definition help expand the purpose of the code? Yes or no? Or is it a maybe? If it's a maybe, maybe you need to tweak it a little bit. If it's an outright no, set it aside for a different day, might be useful later. If it's a yes, then you keep it kind of where it is. Okay. So I think we're going to move here into the last portion of these three topics. So what we would call this third one is referred to as genre and audience analysis. So going back to our earlier part of the discussion today, so okay, say you write a good cover letter and you get a job at, this company, and then you suddenly learn that this company uses either like a particular form and memos like to communicate, or maybe there's a report that's due every quarter or, biannually, reporting sort of earnings or, progress on projects. We would love to get training and orientation or what have you, but oftentimes you get the job and your superiors will expect you just to generate these special types of writing within it. And that might seem like a pretty insurmountable or borderline unfair sort of situation to be placed in, but the good news is that if you analyze and look at examples, you can then identify characteristics and features which you can transfer into your own writing. Now, granted that design documentation is coming up for you, we wanted to provide you with some tools and experience like to learn what it means to look at this type of genre, and then be able to reproduce it into your own writing. So, some questions we'd like for you to consider then for a design document would be, what are you writing? Second, who is it for? And third, why it's important. And another sort of question to consider here then is, where would you go if you didn't know these answers? And we're going to give you some help on that. So first off, if you navigate on, so Canvas for this course, correct?
Right. Canvas.
Yeah, so in Canvas, you will see things like a overview and requirements document that you can go to, which will share some verbiage. So the design document should be clear and comprehensive enough that a reasonably technically competent person could reproduce your system design, though not necessarily every detail, with identical functionality without access to your code base. Our evaluation will be based on how well your design document achieves this principle. In addition, we will also evaluate your technical writing skills by evaluating the following items. Note that this is not an exhaustive list. Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. I mean, we probably see the words, we understand them generally, but what does this mean in the purpose of a design document? What are some phrases that might stick out to people here? If you're wanting to get the good marks, the good grade on it, what's probably going to be important here for this type of assignment?
What's the answer to number one there? What are you writing? Design document, yes, but what is that?
What your code does.
It's a what your code does, right? It's a description of the system, not just the code, but like the database that eventually backs it. The test cases, et cetera, et cetera. We call those collectively artifacts. Code is just one artifact. Test cases and test results are another artifact. And your test data, stuff like that. All of that stuff is what you are describing, right? Why did you make this system? Who are you making this system for? What are the business rules that this client has? Basically the idea is that you should be able to take this document, hand it over to somebody who's not taken this class at all, and maybe is not even well versed in Java at all. Instead, they use a .NET stack, and they would be able to reproduce a similar system that had the exact same functionality as before. Now, it's not going to output exactly everything as before, and of course, they're using a different language, different technology, different whatever. But the idea, the overall functionality should be repeatable from this document.
And why would that repeatability be important? Like, why do we want to get this written down and saved and circulated? Yes?
In a lot of cases, especially since it's a document that can be read and implemented with multiple languages, it's sort of just a more universal way of communicating. This is exactly the purpose of the code. This is exactly what it does. So it can be applied to requirements.
Exactly. Your code is a communication to a dumb machine. This document is a communication to another smart human, right?
Yes, was that another hand, I thought? Or no, just a stretch? Okay. Stretching is fine. It's all it's the Tuesday, Thursday classes. Need to get the blood flowing. Other observations on why this would be important. So we talked about that there's sort of this universality in forms of communication, letting people see meaning in the code that's been done. Other thoughts on?
And for those that are not familiar, it's part of the process too. Typically, a design you don't start writing code in a large scale project. You have a requirements document. That has to be a complete document before you start and be signed off on before you then go into the design phase. The design phase is where you design something before you even have a piece of code, maybe. Now, a lot of methodologies, you can be doing this in parallel to coding and stuff like that, but it is often a precursor or a complement to the actual coding process.
I'd also imagine it could be a huge time saver too, right?
Yep.
Like if you can conceptually describe it, or it's something that doesn't quite match the desires of the client or the person who's interested in the code, why go into those strings and strings and strings and strings and strings if it's like fundamentally or ideologically flawed?
Exactly. I remember one time we were dealing with not a client, but an internal client, a stakeholder is what they're called, and they came down to us and they asked us, can you make it possible to do this? And so it was very they didn't have too much communication skills, and they were trying to translate what they wanted to do. They were playing telephone with another client, right? One client said, I want this. They interpreted it one way, and they came to us and they said that we want this. That back and forth, free writing if you want, whiteboarding, whatever, back and forth, we finally got it out of them that they just wanted their stuff sorted. And when we pointed this out to them, well, you can sort it and then take the top 10, right? And they go, oh, yeah, I guess so. Okay, well, you can do that in Excel, right? Yeah, okay. Well, I'm glad we helped you figure that out. You don't need us. Goodbye.
Yeah, so, and if we do sort of more of a writing-based parallel, some of the things that we might see in letters of application, for example, like the why is this important sort of aspect and having a clear idea of that. So again, we go back to maybe talking to the story of Sparky the dog, right? Depending on what you're doing, maybe Sparky the dog's story would have an important role in a application to veterinarian school, for example. Or does that end up not, is it still like showcasing some sort of element of your character, perhaps? But getting those sorts of things hammered down and how they connect to the purpose, and again, the audience, whether it's the client or the approvals board in this case, like to go into the next steps on it, you want to make sure that the importance is incredibly relevant. I mean, I guess something that I think about is we oftentimes refer to what's called the personal statement. Maybe some of those have seen, think about that in like your college applications, or maybe you're looking for jobs. And the biggest irony about the phrase personal statement is if you see personal, you think it's all about you. It has a lot to do about you, but if your reader doesn't see how that is important and it fits their kind of needs and requirements, a lot of that sharing is then kind of inconsequential and useless.
Right.
So
I was helping out a student recently with their statement of purpose for a graduate school application. And he was talking about how his plans had changed, and he was asking, well, should I put in this story about how COVID changed my plans? And I said, guess what? They're going to get 10,000 other applications. And guess what those 10,000 applications are all going to say? COVID impacted my life, right? So don't do that. Don't do something, cut that. Everybody's going to have that in there. Make it more personal, as in relevant to you, not personal as in, sob story personal, right?
Yeah, for sure. So in this, okay, how do we do this? Like, you can't just take this sort of information and observations and be able to consider to transfer it unless you have an example of some sort. So obviously, Google is going to be chock full of things like example personal statements, both good and not so good. Maybe you're trying to get an article out for publication. There are journals that have these articles with their data and their graphs that you can then look at and make observation. And again, just like focusing on these three questions here at the top. What is being written? Who is it for? And why is it important? Chances are, if the people submitted it to a journal and there was no sort of importance attached to it, you probably wouldn't be seeing it in published form. Again, like, why is it important to focus on other things besides the COVID impact? It's because it's so commonly experienced now, and yeah, you don't want to just kind of be in the slush pile of the exact sort of things that are being stated. So this last kind of part here for our activities, we want to show you, which, by the way, you can go and find this on your own, but we'll get you some a head start on this. Okay, so take a few minutes here looking at sort of the design of this reverse outlining. So again, get some sentences, get some specific words out there to see what the purpose is.
And while you're looking at it, think about what makes this a technical document. How is this different from, I don't know, that novel that you just read, right? Or the newspaper article that you read this morning, or the blog post, or whatever.
Yeah, or even just like a tweet or a social media kind of aspect on it. How is this its own sort of creation? What makes it a design document? Yes.
Is it just that, like, rather than it being like, oh, this happened, it explains like what the process was to go through it and actually like what the means to do it was?
Do you see a specific, like, sort of example? Was there one part that stood out to you for that?
Like, it said the requirements phase and then the system design phase. Like, it shows each phase of like what the plan was and what like you're going to do, or like you did.
Yeah, so first off, we notice some things, right? There is repetition of an important sort of aspect, which is phase, so we can see that there are connections between those. And we've already talked about white space a little bit too, right? It happened in the code to being able to see where things are very separated in terms of function, but white space also has a use here as well.
You could have written, 10 paragraphs describing all this. That's a novel, right? This is not a novel. Instead of writing even a single paragraph, what has the writer chosen to do? Split out those 4 ideas into a bullet-pointed list. The bullet-pointed lists are further highly structured, right? They've got an italicized main idea for that list item, and then a short description of what that item is. Right? Same thing is done down below, right? If you go through that full document, you will never find a paragraph that is more than maybe 3 or 4 sentences long. Right? You always prefer to break things out and organize them into lists like this. Another thing that you see is that you have got section numbers, right? 2.1, 2.2, right? That's directly attributable to an outline that was made for this document.
Other observations that people were making as they were going through this? Yes, please.
I feel like the subject
good, that it's a detached kind of prose, right? There's not a lot of adjectives, right? Not a lot of adverbs. It doesn't need this descriptive language. It's not poetry, right? It is not a novel. It's not poetry. It is what it is. It's a declarative kind of statements. This is it. This is it. This is it. Right? It is not. This is an excellent way of doing it. This is a fair way of doing it. This is no. Cut that. Cut. Right? In fact, what you'll find with technical writing is after you go through the first draft, the second draft should be only cuts. Don't add anything in that second draft. Cut. Now, in the third draft, if you need to go back and add things, great. Do that. But you want minimalistic writing.
Other observations? Whether formatting or content or even just how it looks to the eye?
Is there a narrator? I, we, the team? Nope. All right, it is. It's not the first. It's not first person. It's not even third person. It's no person, right? You talk about like you said. You talk about things as inanimate, right? Next one, maybe. I don't know. Is there another next one?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. This one just focuses on that one paragraph and kind of highlights what we already said, but.
Yeah. So again, we identified these aspects here of how even font and bolding and italicizing makes it so that there are these clear steps here. And so there's also this sort of universal portion of the design that gets repeated between both this section and then, as Dr. Burke was saying, subsequent sections as well. So this can be, I can't remember, is this group project or?
Yeah, pairs, yeah.
Okay. Please, when you are co-authoring these kind of documents, probably one of the things that's going to make us go, clearly you didn't spend as much time on this as you could have, is if there's like different fonts used like halfway through the document, or like, oh, we were using 18-point font on these headers, but then these ones are clearly like 30 or something along those lines.
And that's why we gave you the templates. If one of them is in LaTeX, one of them is in Word. If you want to, you can port those over to Google Docs so that you can share those documents. When you do that, make sure that it looks clean though. And make sure that you're following that IEEE format because that is a standard, right? Another thing that I'll add is that you are not empathy. Not empathy as in feeling sorry for somebody, but putting yourself in another person's position, right? You're the writer of this document. Flip that around and suppose that you were the reader of this document. What would you want to be told, right? And I do that all the time. I write something and then I leave it and I come back to it maybe a week later after I've forgotten it. And then I put myself in the position of a reader. I'm like, why the hell are you telling me this, right? You told me that in the paragraph before. This is not relevant. Throw it out, right? Cut. You're not writing for yourself. You're writing for somebody else. So put yourself in that position. This is not writing for recreation. Again, you're not writing a novel. You're not writing poetry to enjoy. You are writing a document to get something done. And if you're that person reading it and then you have to go and get that thing done, right? Do you want to read paragraph after paragraph after paragraph? Or do you just want to be told just the facts, just the basics, right?
Yeah, and that's something that we often talk about in sort of the world of composition writing, that there's usually about 3 sort of major purposes or goals that writing can do. One is to entertain, one is to inform, and one is to persuade. And so what I think Dr. Burke is really focusing on here are those second and third ones, that there's the informing process, and there might also be the persuading process. If we look at this previous example here in 2.2, it says a key architectural goal is to leverage industry best practices for designing and developing a scalable enterprise-wide J2EE application. So like, okay, like there's a persuasive aspect there. Okay, we want industry to be better. There is this sense of growth and improvement that's being talked there. And by mentioning that it's a key goal, that's going to be more of a persuasive sort of aspect. And of course, persuasive can be other things as well. whether it's talking about like the strength of the code, or what it's hoping to achieve and accomplish on that. But I would imagine, yeah, you're not going to see much stand-up comedy in a design
Yeah, yeah.
document.
You should not enjoy yourself by reading a design document.
But you should feel like you know more and relatively confident that it would work.
And this last example here, yeah, go ahead and go one more. So this goes to that technical aspect, right? If you can replace 10 paragraphs with 3 bullet pointed lists and a few sentences describing them, you can replace 10 pages of description with a very simple diagram, right? This is, we'll get into this later, but this is an ER diagram. This is an entity relation diagram. It completely describes the database all in one figure, right? Each one of those things is a table. The arrows are the relationships between those tables. And within those tables, we've got labels, right? Primary key for PK. We've got FKs for foreign keys. And then we've got all of the column names, right? If you can generate an ER diagram like this, then that replaces dozens, 5 pages of a novel text, right? If you had to write out an actual description of what this is, it would be 5 pages of text. Nobody's going to read that. Nobody wants to read that, right? They want to see a diagram like this. Because at one level, it gives you an entire picture of the database, that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tables, and they're related. Then it allows you to focus on one table at a time, to focus on that one little aspect. And then you can zoom out again and focus on a different aspect of the system. And it's only possible with diagrams.
And I guess that's another question that I would pose to you. Why? Okay, so we see that this is 6.1. So this is still included in the same document that we saw previously with lists and bullet points and subheaders. Why do we include both? Why would we have both styles here? This isn't its own separate document. This is all part of like one big whole. Why put both? Yes?
Well, it's read differently by different people, so not everyone's going to read it.
Right.
Exactly. By making sure to put these different forms of presentation of data and process together, readers are very selective. We would absolutely love for them to go through the things that we put our blood, sweat, and tears into composing from start to finish. Chances are that's not going to happen, though. There might be someone who is just entirely interested in the data model, or maybe someone wants more to focus on like the goals and the approach, or like the phases and the timeline and everything like that. So by including all of these, we are showing a greater awareness of our audiences and that they might have different goals or ways of, kind of processing information as well. And so by even just our initial scanning here, what has this taught you about design documenting? What are you going to want to maybe include in your drafts? This is going to help all of you all if you throw out a couple of ideas here. Yes?
Tables?
Tables? Diagrams?
Graphic explaining classes and how they relate to each other.
Yep. And do you relish the idea of drawing that out by hand?
That's something I've already started doing.
Okay. The drafting should be done by hand, certainly. But ultimately, when you turn it in, are you going to take a phone picture of your handwritten draft diagram?
Formalize it in a more like a computer program.
Exactly. In fact, you can get a program to do it for you. Right? Once you've written your code, you can get a program that's automation. It'll generate that diagram for you. Look really closely at your lab next week. There's a tool that we recommend for you to do it.
Okay, we've heard a lot about the charts and the tables and everything, like all good inclusions, but what else? Like in terms of content or...
So one thing I'll dissuade you from doing is don't look at this Deloitte example and just start copying. That's the primary reason I took off the good student examples from previous semesters. Because the first one we get in is just somebody copied at worst, they just copied everything without really thinking, oh, this is a completely different project. Second, they did change things, replacing the client name and replacing this and replacing that with whatever was relevant this semester, but it didn't reflect their design at all, right? This is for some healthcare website or something like that. Are you writing a healthcare website? No, you're writing a risky financial application management system, right? The stuff that in that document will show you the bones of what your document should look like, but not the details. Don't go off of them for the details.
So, kind of in the last few minutes here, so I think we just want to offer this opportunity to you. Hopefully this has allowed you to see some further bridges between how writing and how coding have similarities to them. While perhaps we might not have the most excellent coders at the Writing Center, we can definitely, though, help you out in terms of, say, like your design documents. And especially now that you've been given some suggestions and tools and even examples as well, that you could go and sit down with a writing consultant if you want an even deeper dive into what these look like and how they might transfer into your own projects. So the Writing Center, I mean, we say one-on-one sessions here, but there is the possibility, especially since this is partner groups, we could probably even work around like groups of 2 as well, or if you wanted to send a representative of the 2, that works as well. But we help in any discipline at any stage of the writing process. Again, this could be the blinking cursor of doom. You might have your full draft of the document. We could go through a reverse outlining with you. We could free write your introduction to the whole project. We can just put ourselves in the position of that kind of like middle individual, like, do we have questions as we read it? Has, kind of the drafting and staring at this computer screen for hours and weeks and days, does it make sense to you, but does it not necessarily make full sense to someone else who might be a more kind of like the layman or sort of general understanding of it?
I'd also put in a plug that even beyond this class, you should go over there with your generic cover letter and CV or resume, because next week is the job fair, right? If you can get in there, quickly, you could go to that job fair with really, really nice looking CV or resume, a generic, 10 copies of a generic cover letter of this is who I am and this is what I'm looking for generally, because of course you won't be able to draft it before you get there to see the actual employers, but you can hand all those things out to the employers, even if you are not looking for a job right now. Right? If you're not looking for a job right now, still get over there to improve those 2 pieces of writing and get over to the job fair to get some practice. Right? You'll find that if you put your resume out to all these employers, you won't have to apply eventually. You'll be headhunted. You'll be contacted eventually.
Yeah, that's a great plug and definitely something that we work at with incoming just drafts and writers all the time. It was huge in the fall. And the good news is we're not as busy usually in the spring when it comes to the fall. So what you would do, we have our website posted up here, unl.edu/writing, or you can just Google UNL Writing Center. That gets our contact information. We got the email up here as well. And what this visit to the Writing Center would actually look like, we do have both online and face-to-face options. The face-to-face is in Andrews 102, which is just over
That way.
that way.
Yep.
Okay. And how this would work is you can either bring in samples of writing that we can kind of read through, or again, if this is just more of a brainstorming session, we can do that as well. And then how the online appointments work is you go into the client where you set up your appointments, and we create just sort of this remote Zoom-esque kind of video chat. And what's really cool is we actually call it the whiteboard in my WC Online. You can type your ideas down onto that space. It's kind of Google Drive-esque. And the other cool thing about that whiteboard is that it will be in place even after the appointment is done. You can copy and paste it, you can export it, or it's another like space of storage that you could go to and review that kind of documentation. Although I will say that the formatting when you copy and paste into the whiteboard can sometimes get a little screwy. So it's maybe a little bit more of an idea generating section. So the appointments are 40 minutes long. It is free. And you can even schedule weekly or once a month appointments. You can click on the individual consultants to learn about their skill sets. So if you find that, like for example, I put technical writing as one of my strengths in that because, well, taught at Iowa State University for 3 years, so I have a little bit of credential there, I suppose. Sports rivalries aside that you might have with Iowa State University, we don't want that necessarily to factor in. So just some things to do when you have an appointment. Having the writing available is really helpful. Having these documents that are shared on Canvas explaining the assignment are also great too. But yes, this doesn't have to be a full draft. This could be right at the beginning. We even do things too where you might have received feedback on it that you're having like some difficulty unpacking, or even just the assignment criteria you might have some difficult unpacking, and that's all sort of things that we're happy to as well. But yeah, if you bring goals, if you bring writing or ideas in there, we are here to help you.
I'd like to thank Ben for coming and the Writing Center for sending him. Again, get down there if you can, or if you need to. Otherwise, your first draft is due tomorrow. All right, have a
Thanks
good
so
weekend.
much, everybody.
Good job. I never got that.